I woke up with a start, feeling the warmth of a body that wasn't William's. My eyes suddenly opened. My eyes opened suddenly, and for a second, I didn't know where I was. Turning my head, I saw Jason next to me, still asleep. Shock ran through my body like lightning. How could I have let this happen? The tension in the air was almost palpable. Our bodies were still close, and I could feel Jason's calm breathing as he slept. My heart was beating fast, so loudly that it seemed to echo in the silent room. My mind, meanwhile, was filled with guilt. Why was I there? Why had I betrayed the man I had promised to spend the rest of my life with? I got up slowly so as not to wake him, the sheets sliding down my body, bringing a wave of painful reality. Every step I took seemed to weigh tons. My thoughts were jumbled, but a silent question kept hammering away in my mind. How could I have let this happen? I remembered the first time I met Jason, the sparkle in his eyes, and the immediate connection I felt, even though I knew it was wrong. "Are you okay?" I heard Jason whisper, his raspy voice bringing me back to the present. I turned to him, not knowing what to say. How could I be all right? I have to go, I managed to say, my voice trembling, charged with conflicting emotions. Jason sat on the bed, his eyes fixed on me, trying to understand what was going on. "Do you regret it?" he asked, and the sincerity in his voice made me tremble even more. "I don't know," I replied, almost in a whisper. The truth was that I didn't know. The guilt was overwhelming, but there was something about Jason, something that pulled me towards him, even if it meant destroying everything I had. The tension in the air continued as I dressed quickly, each movement a mixture of regret and desire. As I left the room, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again, and the question remained, how did I let this happen? The day Jason invited me to a party in New York was like a whirlwind that pulled me into a new world, full of sensations I had never experienced before. It all started with a simple invitation, a note left on my desk at work. "Shall we go out and relax a bit? Party in New York on Friday. It'll be fun. Jason." At the time, I should have ignored it. I was married to William, and I knew that invitation could mean trouble. But something inside me, a part I didn't even know existed, felt a spark of excitement. It was a chance to escape the routine, to feel something different. When I arrived at the party, Jason came to meet me at the entrance. He looked stunning, with his confident smile and penetrating gaze. I could feel my heart racing just being near him. "Glad you could make it, Anna," he said, taking my hand and leading me inside. The room was filled with colorful lights and loud music. There was an energy in the air, a mixture of euphoria and mystery. Jason didn't let go of my hand, and I felt an immediate connection, an attraction I couldn't explain. On the dance floor, the music enveloped us, and the proximity of our bodies increased the tension between us. Jason put his hand on my waist and pulled me closer. I felt his warm breath on my ear as he whispered, "You're a great dancer." I tried to ignore the guilt that was beginning to creep in, but I couldn't pull away. There was something magnetic about him, something that made me want to get closer. The dance brought us even closer, and I could feel the warmth of his body against mine. In the middle of the party, he pulled me into a dark corridor. The sound of the music became muffled, and all I could hear was my own rapid breathing. Jason looked me in the eye, and before I could react, he kissed me. It was a stolen, intense kiss, and I felt a wave of desire run through my body. "Jason, I can't," I whispered, trying to catch my breath. "I know," he replied, his lips still close to mine, "but I can't help it." That kiss changed everything. I knew I had crossed a line, and that there was no turning back. Even so, part of me wanted to carry on, wanted to see where this could take us. The guilt was still there, but the attraction to Jason was stronger. That night, as I drove home, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. I couldn't stop thinking about the kiss, about the feeling of being so close to Jason. At the same time, the image of William haunted me, reminding me of what I was about to lose. I got home and found William asleep on the sofa. He looked so peaceful, so oblivious to what was happening. I felt a twinge of guilt, but also an excitement I couldn't explain. It was as if I was living two lives at once, and the line between them was becoming increasingly blurred. That night, lying next to William, I knew I was on the verge of something dangerous, but also irresistible. The connection with Jason had awakened something in me, something I didn't know existed, and, try as I might, I couldn't ignore it. And so, with a divided heart and a conflicted mind, I fell asleep, knowing that the road ahead would be full of difficult choices and intense emotions. We were walking through the illuminated streets of New York, me and Jason. The city looked like a movie set, with its lights and the constant movement of people. I felt alive in a way I hadn't for a long time. Jason was by my side, and we talked about our lives, our dreams, our frustrations. It was as if we were in a separate world, where only the two of us existed. "Have you ever thought about dropping everything and starting again?" Jason asked, with a smile on his face. But his eyes were serious. "Sometimes," I replied, hesitantly. "But it's complicated, you know? I have responsibilities. A husband." "I understand," he said, looking into my eyes in a way that seemed to see into my soul. "But you can't live your whole life thinking about what other people will think." Those words hit me like a punch in the gut. Jason had a way of making me question everything I thought I knew about myself. We continued walking, and the conversation got even deeper. We talked about our childhoods, our fears, our hopes. I felt connected to him in a way I'd never felt with William. "You're amazing, you know that?" he said suddenly, stopping and holding my hands. "I've never met anyone like you." My heart raced, and I felt a warmth rise through my body. "You're amazing too, Jason. I never thought I'd feel like this again." He moved closer, and I couldn't help it. The attraction between us was palpable, almost tangible. I knew I was playing with fire, but at that moment, I didn't care. All that mattered was Jason and the way he made me feel. "I don't want this night to end," he whispered in my ear, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Neither do I admitted, my voice almost a whisper. We continued walking without a definite destination, just enjoying each other's company. At some point, we stopped at a small cafe that was still open. We sat down at a table in the corner and continued our conversation, now with a cup of coffee in hand. "Have you ever been to a place like this before?" he asked, looking around. "No, never. It's lovely," I replied, looking into his eyes. "I wanted to show it to you. I wanted you to see a part of the city that few people know about. Thank you, Jason, for everything." He smiled, and I felt my heart melt. I knew I was getting too involved, but I couldn't help it. There was something about him that attracted me in an irresistible way. "You know this is crazy, right?" I said, trying to bring some rationality to the situation. "I know, but sometimes madness is exactly what we need." Those words echoed in my mind as we continued our evening. We walked some more, now in silence, but a comfortable silence, full of mutual understanding. I knew I was taking a risk. I knew I was betraying William, but at that moment, all that mattered was Jason and the way he made me feel alive again. Finally, he stopped, held my face with his hands, and looked deeply into my eyes. "I don't want this night to end," he repeated. "Neither do I replied, and before I could think, our lips met in a passionate kiss. I knew I was crossing a line from which there would be no return, but at that moment, I didn't care. I wanted Jason. I wanted that feeling of freedom and passion that he gave me. And so, we let ourselves be carried away by the uncontrollable urge to get closer, even though we knew the consequences this could bring. The text messages between Jason and me were becoming increasingly personal and intense. At first, they were just harmless conversations about work, the weather, life in general. But soon, these messages began to turn into something deeper, more intimate. I found myself waiting anxiously for his next message, my heart beating faster every time my cell phone vibrated. "Last night, I was thinking about you," he wrote one evening. "Me too," I replied, unable to hide the truth. My nights began to be filled with thoughts of Jason. I would roll over in bed, unable to sleep, imagining what it would be like to be next to him. I felt a mixture of excitement and guilt consume me. In quiet moments, my mind would wander, remembering the touches, the looks, the words. And then there was William, my husband. Every time I looked at him, the guilt intensified. How could I be doing this to him? I felt torn inside, torn between the life I knew and the forbidden emotion that Jason brought. "We have a work meeting tomorrow," I lied to William one evening. But at that moment, I didn't care. I wanted Jason. I wanted that feeling of freedom and passion that he gave me. And so, we let ourselves be carried away by the uncontrollable urge to get closer, even though we knew the consequences this could bring. The text messages between Jason and me were becoming increasingly personal and intense. At first, they were just harmless conversations about work, the weather, life in general. But soon, these messages began to turn into something deeper, more intimate. I found myself waiting anxiously for his next message, my heart beating faster every time my cell phone vibrated. "Last night, I was thinking about you," he wrote one evening. "Me too," I replied, unable to hide the truth. My nights began to be filled with thoughts of Jason. I would roll over in bed, unable to sleep, imagining what it would be like to be next to him. I felt a mixture of excitement and guilt consume me. In quiet moments, my mind would wander, remembering the touches, the looks, the words. And then there was William, my husband. Every time I looked at him, the guilt intensified. How could I be doing this to him? I felt torn inside, torn between the life I knew and the forbidden emotion that Jason brought. "We have a work meeting tomorrow," I lied to William one evening. "It's going to be longer, so don't expect me for dinner." He looked at me suspiciously, but didn't question it. I felt a knot forming in my stomach as I left the house, knowing I was about to meet Jason. "You look beautiful," he said when he saw me. His voice had a tone that made my heart race. "Thank you," I replied, trying to hide the anxiety in my voice. "You look great too." In the charming Brooklyn bar, the atmosphere was almost unbearably tense. Every look, every movement seemed charged with an electricity I had never felt before. We talked for a while, but words soon became unnecessary. The desire between us was palpable. "Let's go to my apartment," Jason suggested, his voice low and husky. I nodded in agreement, unable to speak. On the way there, my heart was beating so fast that I thought I might faint. When we arrived, he barely closed the door before pulling me into a passionate kiss. That night, we gave ourselves over to unbridled passion, with no regrets. I knew I was crossing a line, from which there would be no turning back. But at that moment, nothing else mattered but being with him. The next morning, remorse mixed with excitement. I felt alive in a way I'd never felt before, but the guilt was there, like a shadow I couldn't ignore. Coming home and facing William was one of the hardest things I've ever done. He looked at me with love and trust, and I felt like the worst person in the world. "How was the meeting?" he asked, without suspecting a thing. "It was good," I lied again, feeling my heart squeeze. A bit long, but productive. In the days that followed, My mind was divided. During quiet moments, I fantasized about Jason. I thought about our nights together, our conversations, our touches. The double life I was living gave me a sense of danger, but also of pleasure. It was as if I had discovered a part of myself that had been dormant for so long. Jason sent me a message one day saying, "We need to talk about what we're doing." "Yes, we do," I replied, feeling a twinge of fear. I knew he was right, but I didn't want to face reality. We met again, and this time, the conversation was more serious. "We can't go on like this forever," he said, looking into my eyes. "You need to decide what you want." I knew he was right, but the decision seemed impossible. How could I choose between William's security and love and the overwhelming passion I felt for Jason? "I don't know what to do," I admitted, feeling tears forming in my eyes. "I don't either," he said softly, taking my hand. "But I know I don't want to lose you." His words hit me like a blow. I knew I was at a crossroads, and any decision I made would hurt someone, including myself. But at that moment, the only thing I knew for sure was that I didn't want to leave Jason. Even if it meant living with guilt and fear, I wasn't ready to give up the passion he brought into my life. "Let's keep going," I finally said, my voice firm despite the uncertainty. "Let's see where it takes us." Jason pulled me into a kiss, and in that moment, all doubts disappeared. I knew I was choosing the riskiest path, but it was the only one that made my heart beat stronger. And for now, that was enough. The secret meeting in the charming Brooklyn bar was a mixture of adrenaline and desire. When I walked in, the cozy atmosphere and soft lighting created an almost magical atmosphere. Jason was already there, sitting in a discreet corner with a smile that made my heart race. I walked over to him, trying to hide the anxiety that was consuming me. "You came," he said softly, his voice filled with a mixture of surprise and satisfaction. I couldn't resist, I confessed, feeling the heat rise to my face. We sat side by side, our bodies almost touching. The sexual tension was almost unbearable, and every glance, every accidental touch, only increased the electricity between us. We ordered a wine and started chatting, but the conversation soon became secondary. Our gazes said more than words could express. "I can't stop thinking about you," Jason murmured, leaning closer. "Ever since that night, I can't get you out of my head." I knew exactly what he was talking about. The sleepless nights, reliving every moment, every touch, every kiss. The guilt that haunted me every time I looked at William, my husband, but which disappeared the moment I thought of Jason. "I feel the same way," I admitted, my voice shaking. "But that's crazy. I'm married." "I know," he replied, his hand finding mine under the table. "But we can't ignore how we feel." The touch of his hand was like an electric shock. I looked at him, and at that moment, I knew there was no turning back. The decision had already been made, even if I didn't want to admit it. "Let's go to my apartment," he suggested, the desire clear in his gaze. I hesitated for a moment, but the desire to be with him was stronger. I nodded, and he smiled, taking me by the hand. We left the bar, the cold Brooklyn night air enveloping us as we hurried to Jason's apartment. As we entered, the door had barely closed when he pulled me into an intense, urgent kiss. Our hands explored, desperate to know every inch of skin revealed. The passion was unbridled, and the world outside ceased to exist. At that moment, it was just the two of us, united by uncontrollable desire. That first night of passion was a revelation. Every touch, every moan, every sigh was filled with an intensity I had never experienced before. There was no room for regrets or guilt, only for the overwhelming pleasure that consumed us. "I've never felt anything like this," I murmured, panting, as our bodies intertwined. "Neither have I," he replied, his voice charged with emotion. "You're everything I've ever wanted." The night passed in a blur of sensations and emotions. When we finally lay down, exhausted, in each other's arms, a strange peace came over me. For the first time in a long time, I felt complete. "This can't be wrong," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "It's not," he said, kissing my forehead. "It's what we need." I fell asleep in his arms, my heart still racing, but my mind curiously calm. Deep down, I knew I was walking a dangerous path, but at that moment, nothing mattered apart from Jason and how we felt about each other. Dawn brought reality back in full force. The soft light coming through the window illuminated Jason's face beside me, and the guilt finally hit me. How could I face William after that? How could I go back to my normal life knowing that I had crossed a line that couldn't be undone? But then Jason stirred next to me, still asleep, and an involuntary smile appeared on my lips. As much as the guilt was there, the excitement and happiness I felt were undeniable. Perhaps somehow, I could find a way to reconcile these two worlds that were now part of me. I got up silently, putting on my clothes that were scattered on the floor. Before I left, I looked at Jason one last time, recording that moment in my mind. The first night of unbridled passion and no regrets. I knew that this would only be the first of many, and although the future was uncertain, I was willing to face anything for him. With one last look, I left the apartment, ready to face the consequences of what I had started. I woke up to sunlight streaming in through the window and felt a mixture of emotions that are hard to describe. Remorse and excitement mixed in my chest, creating an almost unbearable sensation. Next to me, Jason was still asleep, his breathing calm and rhythmic. Everything around us seemed so peaceful, but inside me, chaos reigned. I felt my heart racing as I thought about what had happened. How could I have let this happen? I, who had always been so careful, so faithful to William. Guilt consumed me, but at the same time, the memory of last night brought me an excitement I couldn't ignore. Jason stirred next to me and opened his eyes, looking at me with a smile that made me forget, for a moment, all the guilt I felt. "Good morning," he said, in a voice hoarse with sleep, reaching out to stroke my cheek. "Good morning," I replied, my voice almost a whisper. The tension in the air was palpable, our bodies still so close that I could feel his warmth. "Are you okay?" Jason asked, concern evident in his eyes. I don't know," I admitted, my mind still filled with guilt. "It all happened so fast." He nodded, as if he understood exactly what I was feeling. "I know, but please don't feel bad. I really like you." Those words made my heart beat even faster. Jason wasn't just a fling. He was someone with whom I felt a real connection. But that connection came at a high price. How could I face William after that? How could I look him in the eye and pretend that nothing had happened? "I have to go," I said, feeling the urgency to get out of there before the guilt swallowed me whole. Jason held my hand. "Please don't go like that. We can talk. Try to understand what this means for us." I looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. But reality hit me like a punch. "I have to go. William, he'll understand." I got out of bed, trying to ignore the pain I saw on Jason's face. As I dressed, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. I knew I had to get home, but the thought of facing William was almost unbearable. When I finally got home, William was in the kitchen, eating his breakfast. He looked at me with a warm smile, the same smile that melted me when we first met. "Good morning, love. How was your evening?" he asked, without suspecting a thing. "It was Good, I lied, feeling a lump in my throat. My guilt was growing by the second, but at the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about Jason and the night we spent together. The next few days were torture. Every moment of silence, every empty space was filled with increasingly daring fantasies about Jason. I found myself smiling to myself, imagining what it would be like to see him again, to touch his skin, to feel his lips on mine. But along with these fantasies, the guilt never left me. Every time I looked at William, I remembered the moments with Jason and felt my heart squeeze. I was living a double life, and as much pleasure as it brought me, it also brought deep pain. One morning, while we were having coffee, William looked at me with a serious expression. "You seem distant lately. Is everything all right?" I froze, my mind racing to find an excuse. "Yes, I'm just a bit tired because of work." He nodded, but I could see the concern in his eyes. "If you need anything, I'm here for you." These words only increased my guilt. William had always been a devoted and loving husband, and I was betraying his trust in the worst possible way. But at the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about Jason. He was like a drug, something I knew was wrong but couldn't let go of. The double life I was living was exciting and terrifying at the same time. Every encounter with Jason was a mixture of pleasure and remorse. Every lie to William was a weight I carried. But somehow, I found pleasure in this duplicity, this dangerous dance between right and wrong. I knew I couldn't go on like this forever. But for now, I was willing to risk everything for those passionate moments with Jason. And that decision, however wrong it was, gave me a sense of control and freedom that I had never experienced before. Jason's proposal for a weekend together in a secluded cabin came as a bolt from the blue, unexpected and electrifying. It was an idea as tempting as it was dangerous, and my heart was already starting to beat faster just thinking about it. I knew I had to find the perfect excuse for William, something he couldn't question. A business trip would be the ideal lie. "Baby, you're not going to believe this," I said, trying to sound casual as we ate dinner. "The company wants me to go to a last-minute conference this weekend. I'll need to travel." William looked up from his plate, surprised. "Conference? Just now? I thought your next event wasn't until next month." "Me too," I lied with a forced smile. "But it looks like something important has come up. Don't worry, it'll be quick." He nodded, seeming to accept the explanation, but a twinge of guilt ran through me. What was I doing? But the image of Jason and the promise of a weekend away from everything, just the two of us, was irresistible. On Friday morning, with my suitcase packed, I said goodbye to William with a quick kiss. "See you Sunday night," I murmured, trying to hide the excitement in my voice. He wished me bon voyage, and I left, my heart heavy and light at the same time. The cabin was in a remote location, surrounded by trees and far from civilization. When I arrived, Jason was already there, waiting on the porch. His eyes were shining with anticipation. "You did it," he said, pulling me into a tight hug. "I was so afraid you'd change your mind." "How could I?" I replied, feeling the warmth of his body against mine. I couldn't wait for it. Inside the cabin, everything seemed perfect. A lit fireplace, an open bottle of wine, and the promise of a weekend of pure passion. The first night was intense and uninterrupted. Every touch, every kiss, seemed charged with electricity. It was as if we were in a world apart, where nothing else mattered. "You drive me crazy," Jason whispered as we lay in bed, our bodies still entwined. "I've never felt that way about anyone before." "Me too," I confessed, feeling a mixture of fear and excitement. "But what if someone finds out? What if—" "Shh," he interrupted, putting a finger to my lips. "Don't think about that now. We're here, together. That's all that matters." But it wasn't that simple. As the days went by, I couldn't shake the thought of the consequences. What if William found out? What if someone saw us together? The adrenaline mixed with fear made everything even more intense. On Sunday, when it was time to go back, I felt my heart clench. Jason held me by the shoulders, his eyes fixed on mine. "You know this can't be just a weekend, right? I want more. I want you." "I know," I replied, fighting back tears. "But it's so complicated." "William, I understand," he said softly. "But think about it. Think about what you really want." On the way home, my mind was in a whirl. The adrenaline from the weekend was still coursing through my veins, but the fear of the consequences was there too. When I entered the house, William welcomed me with a smile and a hug. "How was the conference?" "It was good," I lied, feeling a huge weight on my chest. "Tiring, but good." While I was unpacking, I found a note from Jason hidden among my clothes. "I can't stop thinking about you. This weekend was just the beginning. Jay." I held the note, feeling a rush of emotions. What was I doing with my life? But at the same time, the idea of continuing with Jason was irresistible. The guilt, the fear, the adrenaline. It all just made the passion seem even more intense. I lay next to William that night, trying to hide my inner turmoil. What did the future hold? I didn't know. But one thing was certain. My life would never be the same again. Getting back into a routine had never been so difficult. I found myself constantly struggling to keep up appearances, but every time I looked at William, I felt a pang of guilt eating me up inside. He began to notice that something was different. His suspicions about my behavior grew, and with them, my lies became more elaborate, increasingly difficult to sustain. One evening, while we were having dinner, William looked directly into my eyes and asked, "Are you hiding something from me, Laura?" My heart raced, and I felt a lump in my throat. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Of course not, William. Why are you asking me that?" He sighed, visibly frustrated. "You've been so distant, so different. I feel like I'm losing you." This conversation kept hammering away in my head for the next few days. I knew I had to make a decision. It was impossible to continue living this double life without everything falling apart. And then Jason gave me an ultimatum. He called me one evening, his voice deep and serious. "Laura, we need to talk. I can't go on like this. Either you leave William, or we end our adventure." I found myself caught between two opposing forces. On the one hand, there was the security and stability that William provided. On the other, there was the intense and overwhelming passion I felt for Jason. Indecision consumed me. How could I choose between security and passion? That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, thinking about all the consequences of my choices. What would become of me without William? What if I lost Jason forever? The next day, I met Jason in a cafe. He was impatient, waiting for my answer. "So, Laura, what have you decided?" I looked into his eyes, feeling a tightness in my chest. "I don't know, Jason. I really don't know." He shook his head in frustration. "Laura, I can't go on like this. You have to choose." His words echoed in my mind as I drove home. William was sitting on the sofa, watching television. When he saw me, he smiled, but I could see the sadness in his eyes. I felt lost, not knowing which way to go. But something inside me knew that, whatever the choice, I would have to face the consequences. And that terrified me. The decision to continue with Jason, despite the risks, was made in a moment of pure adrenaline. I knew I was risking everything, but the temptation was too great to resist. Jason was like an addictive drug that I couldn't get off. Every time I was away from him, I felt an almost physical need to go back. The strangest thing was that even with all this madness, I still loved William. But my love for him was different, calmer, and more secure, while with Jason, it was pure passion and intensity. When I told Jason about my decision, his eyes lit up in a way I'd never seen before. He pulled me into a tight hug and whispered in my ear, "I knew you'd come for me." His tone was one of triumph, but also of a deep affection that left me even more confused. "I don't know. I'm still very torn," I said, trying to remain somewhat rational. "Don't think so much. Just feel," he replied, kissing my forehead and holding my face between his hands. At that moment, he suggested meeting in the middle of the afternoon, a place where we could be ourselves without fear of being discovered. The invitation was irresistible and frightening at the same time. I hesitated, worried about the consequences, but temptation won out in the end. "All right, let's do it," I said, feeling my heart beat faster. On the agreed day, I went to the appointed place with a mixture of excitement and fear. Jason was waiting for me in the cafe, a discreet and cozy place in the city center. When he saw me, he flashed a smile that made my legs tremble. "You came," he said, getting up to give me a hug. "I came," I replied, feeling the tension leave my body as I sat in his arms. We sat at a table at the back of the cafe, away from prying eyes. Jason took my hand under the table, his fingers caressing mine in a way that made my whole body vibrate. "I can't stop thinking about you," he confessed, looking me in the eye. "Me neither," I admitted, feeling the guilt creep up on me again. "But what if someone sees us? What if William finds out?" "Leave that to me," he said confidently. "We'll be careful. No one will find out." We spent the next few hours there, talking, laughing, and exchanging glances that said more than any words. With each passing minute, my hesitation diminished and my surrender increased. When Jason suggested we go to his apartment, I knew I was about to cross a line of no return, but I couldn't resist. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice almost a whisper. "More than ever," he replied, holding my hand tightly. We made our way to Jason's apartment, adrenaline coursing through my veins. When we arrived, he was already waiting for me anxiously, as if he couldn't wait another second to be with me. As I entered, I felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. The apartment smelled familiar, a mixture of his perfume and something else that I couldn't identify, but which made me feel at home. "You look beautiful," he said, pulling me close and kissing my neck. "Jason, I began, but was interrupted by the sound of my cell phone. William's name appeared on the screen, and for a second, panic seized me. Jason noticed my hesitation and held my face, his eyes fixed on mine. "Pick up," he said calmly. I took a deep breath and slid my finger across the screen. "Hi, love," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hi, where are you?" William asked, his voice sounding worried. "I'm at work," I lied, feeling my heart racing. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, I just wanted to hear your voice," he replied, and I could feel the relief in his tone. "I love you. I love you too," I replied, then hung up. As I hung up, I looked at Jason, and the mixture of shock and excitement on my face must have been evident. "You're willing to go through with it, aren't you?" he asked, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Yes," I said, without hesitation this time. "I'm willing." At that moment, I realized that I had made my decision. I was willing to face the consequences, to live this double life, because the passion I felt for Jason was something I could no longer ignore. And as he pulled me into a deep, passionate kiss, I felt that, at least for a moment, everything was exactly where it should be. When I arrived at Jason's apartment that day, my heart was pounding so hard that it seemed to echo through the corridors of the building. I was nervous, anxious, but also filled with an excitement I hadn't felt for a long time. Every step I took towards his door seemed to echo inside me, mixing fear and desire in a whirlwind of emotions. When I knocked on the door, Jason opened it quickly, as if he had been expecting me. He stood there with that smile that always melted me. His eyes sparkled in a way that made me feel special, wanted. "You came," he said, his voice low and full of emotion. "Of course I came," I replied, trying to stay calm, but my voice trembled slightly. I entered the apartment and felt the immediate warmth of the room, a mixture of comfort and seduction. Jason closed the door behind me and immediately pulled me into a hug. His arms around me were firm, secure, and for a moment, I allowed myself to sink into that feeling. I was counting the minutes, he whispered in my ear, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. "I was looking forward to seeing you too," I confessed, as I pulled away a little to look him in the eye. "Let's sit down," he suggested, and led me over to the sofa. I sat down next to him, our legs touching, and the tension in the air was palpable. Jason took my hand and began to caress my fingers, his eyes fixed on mine. It was as if he could see right through me, understand all my doubts and desires, without me having to say a word. Suddenly, my cell phone vibrated. It was a message from William. My heart raced once again, this time with guilt. Jason noticed my change of expression and asked softly, "What's up? It's William," I said, almost in a whisper. "He's asking where I am." Jason let go of my hand and remained silent for a moment, watching my face carefully. "And what are you going to answer?" he asked, his voice calm, but with an intensity that made me hold my breath. I looked at my cell phone, then at Jason. "I'm going to say I'm in a meeting," I replied, my voice firm despite the guilt that consumed me. I typed the message quickly and sent it, trying not to think about the consequences of what I was doing. Jason smiled, a smile that mixed relief and excitement. "So you're willing to go through with it?" I sighed, feeling a weight come off my shoulders as I admitted the truth. "Yes, I am." He moved even closer, his face just a few centimeters from mine. "You know this is dangerous, don't you?" he murmured, his lips almost touching mine. "Yes, I do," I replied, my voice a whisper. "But I can't stop. I don't want to stop." Jason kissed me then, a kiss full of passion and urgency, as if he too had been holding on to these feelings for too long. Everything around us disappeared, and for that moment, there was just the two of us. The world outside, with all its expectations and responsibilities, seemed distant, irrelevant. We let go of the kiss, panting, and I looked into his eyes, seeing the reflection of my own desire. "I want you, Jason. I want it all, even if it's wrong." He caressed my face lovingly, his eyes softening. "I want you too, more than anything." Over the next few minutes, we gave ourselves to each other, forgetting all barriers and fears. And in that intimate, safe space, I found a piece of myself that I had lost a long time ago. It was as if, being with Jason, I could be myself, without masks, without judgment. When we finally separated, lying side by side on the sofa, I looked up at the ceiling, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. I knew I was playing with fire, but at that moment, I didn't care. What mattered was the feeling of being alive, of being wanted, of being in love. Jason turned to me and took my hand again. "Let's enjoy every moment, without thinking about tomorrow, just now," he said, his voice soft and comforting. I nodded, a shy smile on my lips. "Yes, let's." And so, in that apartment, with my cell phone still vibrating occasionally with messages from William, I decided that I would follow my heart, even if it meant living a double life. Because at the end of the day, The passion and desire I felt for Jason were irresistible, and I was willing to face the consequences.